The morning Emma planned to finalize her wedding guest list, she received a text from her fiancé that read, "Don't come to the house. I need to talk to your sister first." She didn't think much of it. Ryan was always doing thoughtful things, surprising her with flowers, coordinating with Chloe on birthday plans. That was just Ryan, considerate, warm, hers. She went anyway. She remembered the drive well. The radio played something cheerful, the kind of song you hum without realizing it. She parked outside Ryan's townhouse and walked around the back because the front gate always jammed. That was when she saw them through the kitchen window. Ryan and Chloe, her younger sister, standing very close together. Too close. Chloe's hand on his face, his eyes closed like he was somewhere he'd wanted to be for a long time. Emma stood outside for 47 seconds. She counted, not intentionally, but the numbers came anyway, the way your brain reaches for something solid when everything else is dissolving. She left without knocking. 3 weeks later, their engagement was the headline of every social media account Emma's old school friends followed. Ryan Chambers proposes to Chloe Hart in Santorini. The photos were beautiful. Chloe in a white sundress, Ryan on one knee, the ocean behind them looking like something from a painting. 1,000 comments, all variations of gorgeous and finally, and I always thought you two had something. Emma deleted the apps. Then she took every event she'd been offered and accepted all of them at once. Corporate dinners, anniversary parties, product launches. She buried herself in work because grief needed somewhere to go, and exhaustion was the cheapest substitute she could afford. Which was exactly why, on a rainy Tuesday evening, 3 weeks after the engagement announcement, she accepted a job offer that she should have asked far more questions about. The message came through a high-end agency she occasionally worked with, the kind that placed coordinators at private estates for guests who valued discretion over publicity. The pay was extraordinary. The location was a countryside estate 2 hours from the city, Italian-style architecture, vineyards, private chapel. A single-day assignment. Coordinate a wedding for a family that required complete confidentiality. Emma accepted within the hour. She didn't even Google the family name. The estate hit her first through the windshield. Stone arches draped in flowering vines. A fountain she could hear before she could see it. Iron gates flanked by men in dark suits who checked her credentials without once smiling. A woman named Lena, sharp-eyed and perfectly composed, escorted Emma inside and gave her a 30-minute briefing in a marble hallway, while staff moved around them like a choreographed current. The groom was Alessandro Moretti. Lena said the name the way you'd say the weather forecast, factually, without drama. Emma didn't know it. She had been too consumed by catering menus and centerpiece measurements to keep up with the news, and she did not yet understand what that name meant to the people standing quietly near every doorway. By the time the guests began arriving, dozens of them, then hundreds, filling the estate's great courtyard in dark suits and silk dresses, speaking in Italian and Spanish and languages Emma couldn't immediately place, she had already identified 2 missing floral arrangements, confirmed the caterers were 12 minutes behind, and briefed the string quartet on the adjusted processional timing. She was proud of how smoothly it was running. And then Lena found her at 20 minutes to the ceremony, with a face so carefully blank it communicated panic better than screaming ever could. "The bride," Lena said quietly. "She's gone." Emma looked up from her clipboard. "Gone where?" "Gone." Lena handed her a folded note. "She left this." Emma opened it. "If this marriage happens, thousands will die." She was given 7 minutes with Alessandro Moretti. Emma had seen powerful men before, men who filled rooms with money and confidence, who spoke like every word had already been agreed upon. Alessandro was something different. He was not loud. He was the kind of quiet that made you realize how much noise you'd been making. He read the note once, set it on the desk, and looked at her. "You are the coordinator." "Yes." "You understand what happens if this ceremony does not take place." She glanced at the window. Hundreds of guests. Decades of fragile peace between families she was only beginning to understand were not ordinary families. "I'm starting to," she said. "I need a bride for the next 40 minutes, Alessandro said. "Legally present. The ceremony must proceed." He paused. "You are approximately the right height." Emma almost laughed. She caught it in time. "You want me to marry you?" "Temporarily." "That's not how marriage works." "In my world," he said, "everything is temporary until I decide otherwise." She stood there, holding her clipboard, looking at this man, this stranger with dangerous eyes and a calm that felt like a weapon, and thought about Ryan, about Chloe in the white sundress, about 47 seconds outside a kitchen window. Emma had spent her whole life being the practical one, the quiet one, the one who held things together while other people got the beautiful moments. "I want it in writing," she said. "Annulment within 30 days. And you pay for my therapy." Something shifted at the corner of Alessandro's mouth. Not quite a smile. "Agreed." The ceremony began at sunset. Emma walked down the aisle in a borrowed veil, holding flowers she had arranged herself that morning, standing beside a man she had met 11 minutes ago. And somewhere in the crowd, in the rows of faces watching a wedding that was not supposed to happen, someone smiled, because this was exactly what they had planned. Emma woke up expecting a lawyer. Instead, she got coffee she hadn't asked for, placed silently on her nightstand by a woman she'd never seen, in a bedroom larger than her entire apartment, inside a house that felt less like a home and more like a fortress that had learned to use curtains. She sat up. Her wedding dress, Lena had found her something that almost fit, was hanging on the back of the door, a reminder, in ivory and lace, that yesterday had actually happened. She'd married a man whose last name she'd mispronounced twice at the altar. Emma got dressed, found her clipboard out of habit, and went looking for Alessandro. She found him in a room she would later learn was called the War Room, though it looked deceptively like a study. Bookshelves, a fireplace, maps on the table instead of books. 3 men stood around him, speaking in low voices that stopped the moment she entered. Alessandro looked at her with the same unreadable expression she was beginning to suspect was simply his face. "I'd like to discuss the annulment," Emma said. "Sit down." "I'd rather stand." A pause. "Suit yourself." He gestured for the other men to leave, and they did, instantly, quietly, the way well-trained shadows disappear. Alessandro folded his hands on the table. "The annulment cannot happen yet." Emma's grip tightened on the clipboard. "We had an agreement." "We still do. 30 days, as promised." He said it without apology. "But the missing bride, her disappearance is not yet public. If we file annulment papers now, every family who attended that wedding will know within 48 hours that the ceremony was performed by a substitute. The peace agreement tied to that marriage becomes immediately invalid." "And?" "And 300 men in this country alone are waiting for an excuse to start finishing each other." He said it the way someone else might say, and it might rain tomorrow. Factual, patient, inevitable. Emma sat down. "How long?" she asked. "Until we find her, until we understand who took her and why." He met her eyes. "You will remain here in the estate. You will be introduced as my wife. You will attend certain events and say very little." "I have a job, a life." "You had an event coordination business," Alessandro said, in a tone that suggested he had read a file on her. "Your next booking is in 11 days. That is manageable." Emma stared at him. "Did you just tell me my own schedule?" He didn't answer, which was its own kind of answer. The estate had 42 rooms. Emma counted them on her second day, partly out of boredom, partly because understanding a space made her feel less trapped inside it. Staff moved through the corridors with quiet efficiency. Guards rotated shifts at every entrance. The kitchen, she discovered, was the only room in the house where people actually talked to each other like normal human beings. She spent a lot of time in the kitchen. Lena became something like a guide, not warm exactly, but precise. She explained which rooms were off-limits, which phone lines were monitored, and which of Alessandro's moods meant speak versus disappear. Emma listened carefully and asked questions that surprised Lena enough to earn a single raised eyebrow each time. On day 3, the news broke. Not the truth, no one reported the real bride's disappearance. What broke instead was a photograph. Emma and Alessandro, leaving the estate together for a brief security check at the vineyard, caught by a telephoto lens from somewhere in the surrounding hills. By evening, every major outlet carried it. Mafia boss Alessandro Moretti secretly weds unknown woman. Emma's phone, which Lena had returned with certain contacts quietly blocked, exploded with messages from people she hadn't spoken to in months. Old colleagues, distant relatives, one girl from secondary school who had never once texted her in 15 years. And then, at 9:47 p.m., a message from a number she knew without needing to check. Chloe, is that actually you? Call me. Emma put the phone face down and went to bed. 2,000 kilometers away, Chloe Hart sat in the living room of the penthouse Ryan had bought her, watching the same photograph cycle across 3 different news channels. It's probably nothing, Ryan said, without looking up from his laptop. She probably just met some man at one of her events. You know Emma. She makes herself useful and someone takes advantage. Chloe didn't answer. She was looking at the name beneath Alessandro's photograph, the caption. And then she was reaching for her own phone, pulling up a business profile, then a financial report, then a second one. Alessandro Moretti, international shipping, luxury hotels across 4 continents, vineyards in Tuscany and Argentina, investment portfolios that made Ryan's portfolio look like a school project. She looked at Ryan, who had seemed so impressive 8 months ago, who had seemed like the ceiling of what a man could be. Ryan, who had been quietly asking her to check the business account for overdraft warnings twice this week. Ryan, she said slowly, how much do you actually have? He closed his laptop. Don't start. Chloe looked back at the television, at Emma, standing beside Alessandro Moretti, unsmiling, a little stiff, wearing an expression Chloe had never once seen on her sister's face. She looked powerful. Chloe felt something she hadn't expected to feel. She felt small. It was the ring that bothered Emma, not because it was beautiful, though it was, an oval sapphire surrounded by diamonds that probably cost more than Emma's car. What bothered her was where it was sitting, centered perfectly on the vanity table in the bride's dressing room, placed with deliberate care between a tube of lipstick and a small mirror, like someone had paused mid-thought and simply set it down. Emma had coordinated 64 weddings. She had seen nervous brides, crying brides, brides who changed their minds at the door, and brides who sprinted to the altar. Not one of them had ever left their engagement ring behind. You run from a wedding, you take the ring, always. It's the one thing that's undeniably yours. Unless leaving it behind was the message. She brought it to Alessandro that evening, holding it flat on her palm. He looked at it for a long moment. Where did you find this? Dressing room, center of the vanity. It wasn't hidden. It was placed. She watched his expression. Someone already searched that room and missed it because they were looking for something hidden. They weren't looking for something displayed. Alessandro took the ring and held it to the light. Then he did something Emma didn't expect. He unscrewed the sapphire. Underneath, pressed into the hollow setting, was a strip of paper no wider than a matchstick. 4 numbers, a location code, the kind used for private harbor berths. Emma stared at it. She wasn't running, she said quietly. She was leaving directions. The coastal city of Maratea was 6 hours south, a place of stacked white buildings and fishing boats, and water so blue it looked artificially colored. Alessandro's men moved through it in plain clothes, which helped very little because Alessandro himself had the kind of face that made rooms rearrange around him regardless of what he wore. They traced the harbor berth to a private marina registered under a shell company, dead end officially. But the harbor master, after a conversation with Alessandro that Emma was not present for and did not ask about, confirmed that a woman matching the bride's description had arrived by water taxi 3 nights before the wedding. She hadn't left by boat. A contact at a nearby hotel pointed them toward the casino, Azzurro, perched above the harbor on a cliff road, the kind of place that accepted only cash and asked no questions worth answering. The surveillance room at Azzurro smelled like cigarettes and old coffee. The security manager, a heavy-set man named Petrov, who recognized Alessandro on sight and immediately became very cooperative, pulled footage from the night in question without being asked twice. There she was, the missing bride, Sophia. Emma had learned her name by now, entering the casino's side entrance at 11 p.m. in a dark headscarf that was not quite enough of a disguise. She moved through the floor without gambling, without stopping, crossing directly to the East Lounge. A woman was already waiting, tall, silver-haired, wearing a jacket that even on grainy footage looked expensive. She stood when Sophia approached. They didn't embrace. They spoke for less than 4 minutes. Emma timed it. And then the silver-haired woman produced an envelope, which Sophia took without opening. Together, they walked out to the street. A limousine was waiting. Sophia got in willingly, no hesitation, no backward glance. The limousine plate led to another shell company. Then the footage simply stopped, mid-frame, not corrupted, cut. Someone had deleted 18 minutes from the recording and replaced it with a clean loop of an empty hallway. That deletion happened remotely, Petrov said, looking uncomfortable. From inside an authenticated account. He hesitated. The account credentials belong to your head of estate security, Mr. Moretti. The room went very quiet. Alessandro said nothing on the drive back. Emma had learned to read his silences by now. There was the silence that meant he was thinking, and the silence that meant something had confirmed a fear he'd already carried. This was the second kind. You already suspected someone inside, she said. I suspected. Now I know. He looked out the window at the darkening coastline. The question is whether they are the source or simply a tool. There's a difference? A source has motive. A tool has a handler. He turned to look at her. The silver-haired woman. Did you notice her jacket? Emma thought back. Expensive. Structured shoulders. A pin on the lapel. I couldn't make out the design. I could. His jaw tightened slightly. It was a ship's wheel, specific to one legal firm. A firm that has represented every major family at that wedding for the past 30 years. Emma felt the shape of something enormous shifting beneath the surface of everything she'd been told. This was never about Sophia, she said slowly. No. Someone didn't want to stop a wedding. She turned the thought over carefully. They wanted to start something. The disappearance, the chaos, the substitute bride, it was all engineered to destabilize the peace agreement. Alessandro looked at her with an expression she hadn't seen on his face before. Not quite respect, something just before it. You should have been in this world a long time ago, he said. Emma looked back at the road ahead and said nothing. But quietly, somewhere underneath the fear, something in her agreed. The invitation arrived at the estate on a Wednesday, a charity gala, the kind that charged $10,000 a plate and called it philanthropy, while politicians shook hands over salmon and forgot about it by morning. Alessandro intended to decline. Emma, who had been inside the estate for nearly 2 weeks and was beginning to feel the particular madness of gilded confinement, made a case for attending. "You need to be seen," she said, spreading the invitation flat on the war room table. "Right now, every family connected to that wedding is watching to see if this marriage holds. Hiding here looks like weakness." Alessandro studied her. "You want to go to a party." "I want to do my job," she said, "which, right now, is being your wife convincingly." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Lena will find you something to wear." What Lena found was a deep green gown that fit Emma like it had been made for someone who looked exactly like her, which she privately suspected it had, because Lena did nothing accidentally. Emma stood in front of the mirror for a long time. She didn't look like herself. She looked like a version of herself that had always existed, but never had occasion to show up. She decided she liked her. The gala was held in a converted historic theater, chandeliers overhead, a string quartet in the corner, and the particular species of powerful people who had learned to make wealth look effortless. Alessandro moved through the room the way water moves through stone, not forcefully, but with the absolute certainty that it would get through regardless. Emma stayed close and watched everything. She noticed the way men straightened when Alessandro approached, the way women assessed her with a single glance and then looked again, the second look being the more honest one. She noticed the judges and the diplomats and the city officials who found reasons to drift toward Alessandro's orbit and stay there. She had thought of him as a criminal. She was beginning to understand he was something more complicated than that. She was considering this when she heard a laugh she recognized in her bones. Chloe had arrived 20 minutes after them. Emma knew, somehow, before she even turned around, the way you always know when someone who has hurt you enters a room, some primitive alarm that politeness has never quite managed to silence. Ryan was beside her in a new suit that was slightly too fitted. Chloe wore red, which she always did when she wanted to be the most important person present. Their eyes found each other across the room. Chloe recovered first. She always did. She touched Ryan's arm, said something Emma couldn't hear, and then moved through the crowd with the practiced ease of someone performing spontaneity. "Emma." She arrived with a smile that was 90% teeth. "I didn't know you'd be here." "Chloe?" Emma kept her voice even.
"I didn't know you'd been invited. Ryan has connections everywhere." She said it lightly, then shifted her eyes, slowly, deliberately, to Alessandro. "You must be the husband." She extended her hand. "I'm Chloe, Emma's sister. I've heard so much about you."
"I've heard nothing about you," Alessandro said pleasantly. Something flickered behind Chloe's eyes. She laughed as though he'd said something charming. Emma watched it happen in real time over the following hour. Chloe was skilled, she had always been skilled, at making attention look accidental. She circulated the room, but always resolved back near Alessandro. She asked him questions about his vineyards with the expression of someone genuinely curious rather than deliberately positioning. She laughed at the right moments and was quiet at others, and she touched his arm once, briefly, lightly, when making a point about Italian wine regions. Ryan, meanwhile, had found the bar. Emma crossed the room to stand beside him. He looked older than she remembered, or perhaps just smaller, diminished in the way that happened when a person was measured against their own choices. "She's working him," Emma said quietly. Ryan didn't pretend not to know what she meant.
She's just being friendly. Chloe is never just anything. Emma looked at him. How bad is it, Ryan, financially? He stiffened. I'm not asking to gloat, she said. I'm asking because whatever she's doing over there, it's going to make things worse for both of you. Ryan finished his drink, set the glass down. For a moment, one honest moment, the performance dropped, and Emma saw someone genuinely frightened underneath. We're 6 months from losing everything, he said quietly. The investment firm collapsed. The properties are leveraged beyond recovery. He didn't look at her. I thought marrying Chloe would. He stopped. Solve it, Emma finished. He said nothing, which was enough. On the way home, Alessandro was quiet for several miles before he spoke. Your sister is intelligent, he said. Yes, Emma agreed, and dangerous. More than she knows. Emma looked out at the passing dark. She doesn't realize yet that she's already being watched. Alessandro glanced at her. By whom? Emma turned from the window. That's what worries me, because it isn't us. Alessandro's hands tightened on the wheel, barely, just enough for Emma to notice. First time she'd ever seen him react to something before he'd planned to. The monastery sat at the edge of a mountain road that most maps had stopped bothering to include. Alessandro's contact, an elderly archivist named Brother Cesare, who had apparently been keeping secrets for powerful families since before Alessandro was born, led them through 3 locked doors and 1 very steep staircase to a room that smelled of candle wax and forgotten years. Wooden shelves lined every wall, floor to ceiling, packed with document boxes labeled in handwriting so old it had become its own language. The original peace treaty, Brother Cesare said, placing a box on the central table with the reverence of someone handling bones. Signed 41 years ago. No copies exist outside this room. He looked at Alessandro. Your father made certain of that. Alessandro opened the box himself. Emma stood beside him and read. The document was 60 pages long and written in 3 languages. The first 40 pages were what everyone knew: territory agreements, trade boundaries, governance protocols for disputes. The language of men who had decided that structured peace was more profitable than unstructured war. It was page 43 that stopped Emma cold. She read it twice, then a third time, certain she was misunderstanding the legal phrasing. She wasn't. Alessandro, she kept her voice steady, this treaty doesn't just govern territory. He looked up from the page he was reading. It governs 18 ports. She pointed to the clause.
6 in Italy, 4 in Spain, 3 in Greece, 2 in Croatia, 3 in North Africa. Every family signed over collective operational rights to the married couple of the Moretti line, jointly held, non-transferable, only valid while the marriage stands. She looked at him. Whoever controls those ports controls every legitimate shipping route these families use. That's not just organized crime infrastructure. Those ports handle international commercial freight, pharmaceutical supply chains, agricultural exports, billions of dollars moving through them every year. Alessandro was very still. You didn't know, Emma said. It wasn't a question. My father never showed me the full document. Something moved across his face, not quite anger, not quite grief. The expression of a man recalculating everything he thought he understood. He said the treaty was about peace. It is, Emma said. It's also about control. Whoever holds this marriage holds the ports. She set the page down carefully. Someone didn't want to stop your wedding because of the bride. They wanted to stop it because of what the marriage gives the person who controls it. Brother Cesare, who had been standing quietly in the corner, spoke without being asked.
There is one more thing, he said. He reached into the box and produced a smaller envelope, sealed with wax. Your father left this. He said it was to be opened only if the marriage was ever threatened. Alessandro broke the seal. Inside was a single, handwritten line. The lawyer knows where the ports lead. Trust no one who has read this treaty. They left the monastery at noon and drove directly to the vineyard, a working estate an hour north, Alessandro's preferred location for conversations he didn't want recorded. The vines were heavy with late-season growth, the air thick with the particular sweetness of something almost ready. Emma had brought copies of the relevant treaty pages. She spread them on the outdoor table beneath a pergola, while Alessandro's vineyard manager brought water and then disappeared tactfully. They worked through it methodically, Emma tracing the legal language, Alessandro filling in the operational knowledge behind each port. It was the most honest conversation they'd had since the wedding, and Emma was aware of that, even as it was happening. An hour in, the vineyard manager returned. He set 2 glasses of wine on the table and retreated. A small gesture, a natural one. Emma reached for the nearest glass. Alessandro picked up the other. She watched him lift it toward his mouth, and something, a detail so small she nearly dismissed it, made her pause. The glass Alessandro had been given was slightly fuller than hers, and the vineyard manager, who had worked this estate for 11 years according to Lena's briefing, had placed it on Alessandro's side with his left hand. He was right-handed, and they had noticed that on the first day. "Don't drink that," she said. Alessandro stopped. "Switch glasses with me." He looked at her steadily for 1 second, then set the glass down without argument. He called for the manager, who emerged from the villa looking entirely composed. Too composed, Emma thought, for a man who'd just heard his employer's voice take that particular tone. By the time the glass was tested, the manager was already gone. A motorbike had been heard leaving through the back grove. Alessandro's men found it abandoned at a crossroads 2 kilometers from the estate. The wine had contained enough to put Alessandro in a hospital for 2 weeks. Sitting in the vineyard in the late afternoon light, the treaty pages spread between them, Emma felt the full weight of it settle onto her shoulders. Whoever was behind this wasn't making threats. They were eliminating obstacles. And Alessandro, she realized, looking at him across the table, watching him absorb the enormity of his own near miss with absolute, controlled stillness, was not frightened. He was resolute. Which, she was beginning to understand, was far more dangerous. She found, to her own surprise, that she was too. The orphanage was in a town that felt like it had given up on itself gradually. Peeling shutters, a dried fountain in the square, a bar with 1 customer who didn't look up when they entered. The building itself was still operational, technically, though the word thriving would have been generous. A nun named Sister Agnese ran it with the kind of exhausted dedication that deserved more recognition than it would ever receive. She recognized Alessandro's name. Most people did, eventually. She did not, however, recognize Sophia's. "We had a child placed here under this name," Alessandro said, sliding a photograph across the desk. Sophia at perhaps dark-haired, serious-eyed. The photograph had come from the Moretti family records, a background document prepared when the marriage arrangement was first made, 15 years ago. Sister Agnese studied it for a long moment. "This child," she said carefully, "was never here." Emma had learned, in the past 3 weeks, to trust the feeling that arrived just before a discovery, a particular stillness, like the air before a storm decides what it wants to be. She felt it now. They spent 2 hours with Sister Agnese going through physical records, actual paper ledgers, the kind that couldn't be remotely deleted.
No Sophia. No child matching the photograph placed at the orphanage in any year within a decade of the date on the document. From the orphanage, they drove to the civil registry office, where a clerk who initially resisted their presence became considerably more cooperative after a brief phone call Alessandro made from the parking lot. Birth records for Sophia, checked. School enrollment files, checked. Medical registration with the regional health authority, checked. Every document existed. Every document had been created in the same 14-month window 15 years ago. Before that window, nothing. No hospital record of a birth, no family registration, no immigration entry, no prior identity of any kind. She didn't grow up, Emma said quietly, sitting in the car outside the registry office. She was built. Someone constructed an entire childhood on paper and inserted it into a real family's history. The Benedetti family accepted her as a cousin's child, Alessandro said. No one questioned it because the cousin existed and had died in an accident. It was verifiable enough. Whoever did this knew the family well enough to find a gap. Emma turned to face him. This took years of planning, Alessandro. This isn't someone who reacted to your wedding. This is someone who prepared for it. He was quiet. The marriage arrangement. When was it first discussed? 16 years ago, he said. Between my father and the head of the Benedetti family. Emma let that land. So someone knew about the arrangement within a year of it being made, planted a false identity inside the Benedetti family, waited 15 years, and then, at the exact moment it mattered, made her disappear. She shook her head slowly. This person has been inside your world for a very long time. What Emma didn't know, what she had no reason to suspect, was that 400 kilometers north, her sister was having dinner with a man she had met at the gala. His name was Donatello Greco. 50s, silver-haired, impeccably dressed. He had approached Chloe 3 days after the charity event with a business card and a proposal. He represented investors interested in Ryan's company, he said, a potential lifeline. All he needed in return was information. Nothing sensitive, he assured her. Simply context. What was Alessandro like privately? Was the marriage stable? Did Emma seem happy or under stress? Chloe told herself it was harmless. She told herself this over the appetizers, and again over the main course, and one more time over dessert when Donatello asked very specific questions about which vineyard Alessandro used for private meetings. She answered because Ryan had looked genuinely afraid that morning when he'd checked their account balance. She answered because Chloe had always been good at convincing herself that what she wanted to be true was true. She did not notice that Donatello's jacket lapel pin, a small silver ship's wheel, was the same one Emma had glimpsed on the silver-haired woman in the casino footage. She did not notice that Donatello had never once mentioned the name of his investment firm. She did not notice that when he excused himself briefly from the table, he photographed her phone screen with a device no larger than a pen. She went home feeling like she had solved something. Emma found the connection at midnight, sitting cross-legged on the bed in her estate room with Brother Cesare's treaty copies spread around her and her laptop open to 15 years of archived news. It was a small thing, a footnote in a decade-old shipping dispute, a legal firm referenced in passing, and beside the firm's name, listed as junior counsel at the time, a name she hadn't seen before. Donatello Greco. She stared at it. Then she pulled up the casino footage on her laptop. Alessandro had given her access to the full archive. She zoomed on the silver-haired woman's lapel. Ship's wheel pin. She reached for her phone to call Alessandro, and then stopped. Her call log showed an outgoing call she hadn't made. To Chloe. 40 minutes ago, while she'd been in the shower. Someone had used her phone. Emma didn't tell Alessandro about the phone. Not immediately. She needed to understand it first. Who had accessed it? What had been said? And most importantly, What Chloe had revealed on the other end of that call without knowing she was being recorded rather than spoken to. She spent the night quietly, watched the corridor outside her room through a 2-inch gap in the door for 40 minutes, counted staff movements, identified a rotation pattern that left a 3-minute window every hour where her hallway had no direct observation. At 6 a.m., she placed the phone on Alessandro's desk with the call log open and said nothing. He read it, looked at her. "You didn't make this call." "No." "Someone in this house did." "Yes, someone who knew my passcode, had access to my room during that specific window, and knew Chloe's number was in my contacts." She sat down. "Which means whoever is inside your organization also knows about my sister. They're using her deliberately." Alessandro picked up his own phone and made a call, in Italian, too rapid for Emma to follow. When he set it down, his expression had resolved into something final. "We found her," he said. Emma looked up. "Sofia. A contact traced her to a private island off the Calabrian coast." He stood. "We leave in 3 hours." The yacht was smaller than Emma expected. Deliberately so, Alessandro explained. Smaller meant less visible. They traveled with 4 men instead of the usual 12, wearing nothing that identified them, carrying documentation that belonged to people who didn't exist. Emma stood at the bow for most of the crossing and watched the water. She thought about the phone call, about Chloe sitting across a dinner table from a man with a silver pin, answering questions she didn't understand were weapons. Chloe had always been reckless with information. She treated secrets like currency, spending them freely, never understanding they only had value once. This time, the cost would be something neither of them could afford. The island was barely an island, a rocky outcrop with a single stone structure, half hidden by overgrown Mediterranean brush. They anchored a kilometer out and came ashore in a rigid inflatable, engine cut, oars only. Sofia was inside. She looked like someone who had been afraid for a very long time and had passed through fear into something quieter on the other side. She was thin, alert. She recognized Alessandro instantly and stood, but there was no relief in her expression, only the particular tension of someone who has information they are not certain will be believed. "I didn't run," she said before Alessandro could speak. "I want you to know that first." "Tell me everything," he said. She did. 3 months before the wedding, Sofia had received a message through a channel only her family used, a private courier system, impossible to fake. The message was simple. Marry Alessandro Moretti and her younger brother Marco, currently studying in London, would be finished before the wedding night. She had told no one because the message included a photograph of Marco outside his university building, taken that same morning. She had cooperated, attended fittings, met with planners, performed the role of willing bride with the particular discipline of someone who has decided to survive. And then, 2 weeks before the ceremony, the silver-haired woman had made contact through the casino. She told Sofia the plan had changed. Marco would only be safe if Sofia disappeared before the wedding, not after. She was given the hollow ring, the harbor code, the island location. "She told me a substitute would be found," Sofia said. She looked at Emma with an expression that was almost an apology. "She said it would be someone with nothing to lose." Emma absorbed that quietly. "Did she tell you her name?" Alessandro asked. "No, but she told me who gave the orders." Sofia paused. "She said it was the man who drafted the original treaty, the one who has served every family for 30 years. Alessandro's jaw tightened. Greco. She called him the architect. They had been on the island for 40 minutes when Emma felt it, that stillness again,
the pre-storm feeling. She moved to the window. 3 boats, coming fast from the eastern channel, lights off. "We need to leave," she said. "Now!" Alessandro was already moving. They reached the inflatable with 90 seconds to spare. Emma helped Sophia into the water, and the 4 guards formed a perimeter behind them as they pushed off from the rocks. The first shot came just as they cleared the shallows, high, a warning, which meant whoever was firing wanted someone alive. Emma knew enough now to understand that someone was probably her. The crossing back to the yacht was 4 minutes. It felt considerably longer. Once aboard, Alessandro's pilot had engines running before they'd cleared the ladder. They were a kilometer out when Emma looked back at the island and saw the 3 boats clustered around the shore. Not pursuing, waiting. "They knew we'd come," she said. "They knew the route, the timing, the island." Alessandro stood beside her, watching the distance grow between them and the shoreline. The travel details were arranged this morning. 4 people knew. "Then one of your 4—" "No." His voice was very controlled. "The details were arranged on your phone, before I moved them to mine." He turned to look at her. "Whoever made that call last night didn't just contact your sister. They read every message on your device." Emma thought of Chloe at a dinner table, answering questions she didn't know were loaded. She didn't feel angry. She felt something colder and more focused than anger. She felt certain. The Peace Summit had been scheduled for months. 40 delegates, 7 families, 3 days inside a historic opera house in Naples that had hosted dangerous people and armistices in roughly equal measure over the past century. Alessandro had intended to attend as a formality, a show of stability, a reminder that the Moretti name still meant something. Now, it was the only stage large enough for what needed to happen. They arrived the evening before the summit opened.
Sophia traveled separately under a name that didn't exist yet. Emma sat beside Alessandro in the car and watched Naples emerge from the motorway dark, lit and layered, beautiful in the way that cities are beautiful when they've survived enough to stop caring whether you notice. "Greco will be there," Alessandro said. "I know. He has been legal counsel to every family in that room for 30 years. He has their trust in a way that cannot be argued against with accusations alone." He looked at her. "We need proof that lands in public, in front of all of them, simultaneously, something he cannot reframe or delay." Emma had been thinking about this since the boat. "I have something," she said, "but I need Chloe." Alessandro was quiet for a moment. "Your sister has been feeding information to the man trying to destroy everything." "She didn't know what she was doing." "That is not the same as it being safe to involve her." "No," Emma agreed. "But Chloe has been meeting Greco directly, in person. He trusts her because he thinks she's greedy and careless." She paused. "He's not entirely wrong. But greedy and careless people can be redirected if the incentive is right." Alessandro looked at her for a long moment. "What's the incentive?" he asked. "Survival," Emma said simply. "Once Greco realizes she knows too much, she becomes a liability. I need her to understand that before he does." Chloe answered on the second ring, which meant she'd been waiting for the call. Emma didn't give her time to perform. "I know about Greco. I know about the dinners, the questions, the photograph of your phone screen." A silence. "I'm not calling to punish you. I'm calling because he will, if you don't move first." The silence stretched long enough that Emma thought the line had dropped. Then, "How much trouble am I in?" "Significant," Emma said, "but survivable. I need you to bring me everything. Every conversation, every question he asked, every answer you gave. And I need you in Naples by tomorrow morning. Another silence, shorter this time. Ryan doesn't know I've been meeting him, Chloe said quietly. I know. Emma. Her voice did something it almost never did. It cracked, just slightly, at the edge. I thought I was helping us. Emma closed her eyes briefly. I know that too. Come to Naples, Chloe. The opera house was everything its reputation promised, gilded and grand, with the particular acoustics that made whispers carry and silences feel deliberate. Delegates arrived through separate entrances. Staff moved between them with the careful neutrality of people who understood that their job was invisibility. Greco arrived mid-morning. Emma watched him from a mezzanine corridor. He was exactly as she'd imagined, composed, silver-haired, moving through the room with the ease of a man who had spent decades being trusted. He greeted family heads by name, touched elbows, laughed at the right moments. He looked like the safest person in the building. Chloe arrived an hour later. She looked like someone who hadn't slept, which Emma suspected was accurate. She had brought everything. Printed records of her conversations with Greco, voice recordings she'd made on instinct during their last 2 meetings without fully understanding why, and a series of messages he'd sent through an encrypted app that she'd screenshotted before he'd instructed her to delete them. It was more than Emma had hoped for. He sent someone to our apartment last night, Chloe said. Looking through Ryan's office. Ryan thinks it was a break-in. She looked at Emma directly for the first time. It wasn't a break-in, was it? No. Chloe nodded slowly. The last of something, some performance she'd been sustaining, quietly left her face. What remained was simpler. Frightened. Real. The summit's open session began at 2. Greco rose to address the delegates 40 minutes in, as scheduled, a routine legal update on treaty compliance. Emma watched from the gallery as he settled his papers, adjusted his pin, and opened his mouth. Alessandro spoke first. He stood without announcement, and the room deferred to him the way rooms always did, not from politeness, but from something older and more instinctive. He presented the evidence methodically, the fabricated identity, the casino footage, the island ambush, the treaty clause that Greco had hidden from every family for 40 years, the one that handed port control to whoever disrupted the marriage. Then Emma played Chloe's recordings through the opera house speakers. Greco's own voice filled that gilded room, instructing, directing, naming. 30 years of careful positioning dissolved in 4 minutes of audio. Greco stood very still. The room around him was not still at all. He turned toward the exit. The man blocking it had been placed there by Alessandro an hour earlier. It was then that the shot came. Not from the delegates, not from Alessandro's men, but from a service corridor to the left, a hired silencer aimed at Chloe. Emma was already moving. She crossed the gallery in 6 steps and pulled Chloe behind a stone pillar as the shot struck the seat she had been occupying. Chloe gripped her arm, hard. "You came for me," she said, like she genuinely hadn't known Emma would. Emma looked at her sister, this woman who had taken so much, who had given so little, who was holding on to her now like the only solid thing in a dissolving world. "You're my sister," Emma said, quietly, without drama. It was the most devastating thing she could have said. The weeks after Naples moved differently. Slower in some places, faster in others, the way time behaves when the thing you've been bracing against has finally passed and your body doesn't quite know what to do with the absence of it. Greco was taken into formal custody by authorities from 3 countries simultaneously, which Alessandro had arranged quietly in the 48 hours before the summit, with the kind of precision that Emma was no longer surprised by, but still found remarkable. The legal case against him was substantial enough that even the families who had trusted him for decades did not attempt to intervene.
Some of them, Emma suspected, were quietly relieved to have a villain named, someone to blame for 40 years of manipulation that had cost them more than they'd realized. Sophia returned to the Benedetti family. Her brother Marco was located in London, unharmed, having spent 3 months under a protection detail he hadn't known was there. She came to the estate once, briefly, to thank Emma in person. She stood in the entrance hall and looked at her for a long moment. "You were braver in that chapel than I would have been," Sophia said. "You were braver for 3 months than most people are in a lifetime," Emma replied. They didn't embrace, but something passed between them that didn't need a name. Ryan was arrested on a Tuesday. The investigation into Greco had pulled threads that unraveled several other things: financial structures, falsified documents, leveraged assets that existed only on paper. Ryan's name appeared in enough of them to constitute a case that his lawyers, expensive as they were, could not make disappear. He was remanded, and the trial was set for spring. Chloe called Emma when it happened. She didn't cry on the phone, or if she did, she waited until after she'd hung up. What she said was, "I don't know what I'm supposed to do now." Emma thought about it honestly before answering. "Start with today," she said. "Just today. That's enough." It wasn't forgiveness, exactly. Emma wasn't certain forgiveness was something she could manufacture on schedule for someone who had taken what Chloe had taken from her. But it wasn't cruelty either.
It was something more sustainable than both, a kind of clear-eyed compassion that looked at Chloe and saw a person capable of better things who had consistently chosen easier ones, and decided that the future was worth more than the account. Chloe lost the penthouse within a month. She moved into a small flat in a part of the city she'd previously only driven through. Emma quietly arranged for 3 months of financial assistance through a channel Chloe couldn't trace back to her. Not because she wanted secrecy, but because she knew Chloe would refuse it if she knew the source, and pride was one wound Emma couldn't afford to aggravate right now. Their relationship remained what it was: fragile, honest, unresolved in the way that real things between real people so often are. Not a fairy tale reconciliation, not a clean ending. Something true. The estate felt different in the months that followed. The guards were still there. The war room still had maps on the table. Alessandro was still Alessandro, still the kind of quiet that made rooms rearrange themselves. None of that changed. What changed was smaller. A cup of coffee on Emma's desk when she was working late. A habit he'd apparently developed of asking her opinion before making decisions that had nothing to do with her, simply because he'd found her instincts reliable. The way he'd begun to explain things rather than state them, offering context where before he'd only offered conclusions. Emma noticed all of it, without commenting on any of it. She stayed past the 30 days. She told herself it was practical. The investigation was still active. The treaty still required the marriage to hold. These things were true. They were not, she eventually admitted to herself, somewhere around the 2nd month. The reason. He took her to the lake on a morning in early spring when the mist hadn't fully lifted and the water was the color of old silver. There was a chapel at the edge of the property, small, stone, older than everything else on the estate. No guests, no guards at the door, no delegates or diplomats or family heads with decades of grievances. Just the chapel and the lake and the light coming through the trees at an angle that made everything look like it had been arranged deliberately. Alessandro stood at the door and waited for her to reach him. He didn't make a speech. That wasn't who he was, and Emma had long since stopped expecting him to become someone different than the person he actually was. That, she suspected, was what real things felt like. "The first time," he said, "you walked down an aisle for other people." Emma looked at him. "I would like you to do it again," he said.
For yourself. And possibly for me. She looked at the chapel, at the lake, at this man who had entered her life as a stranger and stayed as something she didn't yet have the right word for, though the word existed, and she suspected she'd find it soon. She thought about a kitchen window, 47 seconds, a song on the radio she couldn't remember anymore. She thought about how far she was from that parking lot. Yes, she said. She walked through the door, and this time, finally, completely, on her own terms, the wedding belonged to the right bride.